Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Podcast listeners, welcome to Making Data Simple. We are back. This is where I selfishly get to meet with great people, have a lot of fun, learn, and then I just call it a podcast so that I can get away with it. So that's what we're going to do today. Again, with me today, I have Christina Montgomery, who's the IBM Chief Privacy and Trust Officer. She's also the AI Ethics Board Chair. So just jumping right in, Christina, welcome. Thank you for being my latest victim on the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
We're going to have fun. So the first thing I always do out of respect and courtesy is allow you to introduce yourself. What's your experience, and, go back as far as you'll allow us, and then what brings you to where you sit today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually an attorney. I've been working for IBM for the vast majority of my career, and I've been supporting business units that we don't even have anymore, in addition to various other parts of the business over the years. So everything from our systems and technology groups, so our hardware, microelectronics, which we were in for a long period of time, right? I did a lot of the foundational work that's led to our relationships in Albany, for example, in advanced research in microelectronics, supporting the legal aspects of that. Most recently, I was the corporate secretary to the board of directors. So I spent 5 years doing sort of that corporate governance work and really getting a bird's eye view of the IBM business and working closely as well and hearing from investors to understand their perspectives on the company, working with our IR team. So it's a great perspective to bring then into this role, which right now is responsible for our AI ethics board, our governance around AI, data, privacy, and the like. And so it's been a great perspective because this touches every one of our stakeholders. And it's also very important to have an understanding of governance, how the company works, how our processes work, getting that bird's eye view, because we're very much an integrated function. And my job enables me, very fortunately, to work with every facet of the company, everything from our research teams to our product teams to our users of AI technology and assets that process personal information and the like, because privacy is a foundational piece of this.
Fantastic. You got quite the resume. Also Harvard Law School, if I have that right. Fantastic. Yes. How long have you been at IBM?
Dare I say, I just celebrated 30 years.
Wow. Why IBM? You go to law school, and why you choose IBM? You got to tell me that.
Well, I was at a law firm first, and I very much liked the business advisory aspects of my job and being involved in the business, being close to the business, understanding how business works, doing practical projects. And also for me, I very much like to do many things at once. I'm very much sort of a multitasker, I like to be and when you're at a firm and you're working on deals, you're working on one thing for a very long time. And I like to have 50 things. I like to have 100 things going on. That's what motivates me. And I love the connection to the business. So I've stayed many years because I've had multiple different careers. And that's what enables, working at a company like IBM. First of all, the technology evolves so rapidly. I mean, the businesses we were in when I joined, remember, you probably don't, but for those in the audience, we were under a consent decree for monopolization. I mean, think about that now and where we are. So we had rules that were dictated by the government that we had to follow. We were very much a hardware company at the time, right? And then we evolved and we couldn't have a services business 30 years ago because that was part of the consent decree prohibitions. So we're a very different company.
Wow.
And so, I've had very different career over the last 30 years.
You're very well spoken, which I would expect. And I don't want to debate you because I presume that you're one hell of a debater. You know what's funny? I kid you not. Coincidentally, my middle daughter is taking the bar today.
My son is taking the bar today.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Did your son freak out like my daughter did? Because my daughter freaked out, I have to say. She's like, oh, I don't know if like 2 weeks ago, it's like, well, maybe I'm just going to do it next time. She was just, I think, studying too much and got to the point where she wasn't doing anything and then started freaking out a little bit. Over the last week, it's calmed down, thankfully, but I don't know if that was the same experience that you had or your son had. But my God, I was like, you got to take the bar. There's no choice here.
Yeah, no, he's been pretty good. And I think it's helpful for him to hear from me and my freakouts because I've been through it. So I'm just, here's your goal. And here's what happens if you get a question that trips you up. And here's the strategy, and just constant confidence boosts. But it was funny because I was talking to my parents last night and they said, do you remember you called us at 5:00 in the morning before your bar and said, I'm going to fail. I can't take this. So,
So it does go around. It is a common thought.
It is a very common thought. And you think about lawyers, we tend to be very competitive to begin with. You're very driven. Maybe competitive is not the right word. You're not going to law school unless you're ambitious and driven and academically minded and used to being at the top of at the top of things, right? You're used to being very successful. And that fear of failure, it gets anybody. It's a hazing for lawyers is what the bar exam is. It's absolutely a hazing experience.
The unfortunate thing is I'm not a lawyer. So I couldn't give the advice. I should have called you if I'd have known that. I said, I need you to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
But I did say that. I said, look, this is just about a challenge, a hazing to get through. You can do this. Yep. Just keep your composure, have confidence. We'll deal with it. It all works out in the end. But it is a 2-day affair. I mean, you know this. But today it's all the written stuff. And I guess tomorrow is actually test. I think the challenge, and you probably know this again better than anybody else, it's something like 3 months before they get the results back or something. I don't know.
Yep.
That's crazy. With this day and age, you got to wait 3 months and then figure out whether you pass or not and then what you're going to do. That's almost as troubling as taking the test itself, I would think.
Yeah, the anxiety. It's not. I will tell you it's not as troubling as taking the test itself. Taking the test is a painful, harrowing experience. 2 days of 8-hour tests. Usually in a big convention center, with lots of other people. It is totally meant to intimidate you, but she'll get through it.
So if I would have talked to you prior, and darn, I should have done so. But anyway, if I would have talked to you prior, what advice would you have given her? What advice did you give to your son?
Mindset is everything. Go in, and it's similar to what I do when I'm preparing for a big presentation, right? Or for a big client meeting, or for a podcast, whatever it might be, right? Getting your head in the right place. You've done the work. You've studied for this thing. You have to have a positive mindset approaching the test. It's going to make all the difference.
That is actually the advice I gave her, but I think coming from somebody that has done it probably would have had a little bit more power.
Yeah.
But we'll see. We'll see. She was in it today. I talked to her last night, texted her this morning, and sounded like she was in good spirit. I hope she slept. Like you woke up at 5 a.m. I was worried about whether she was even sleeping or not. I don't know if your son slept or not, but that seems like the worry to me too. Anyway.
I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I literally didn't sleep a wink the first or the second night of my test, and I passed. So, either way, sleep or no sleep.
It all works out. It all works out. All right, so let's talk about IBM Chief Privacy and Trust Officer. What constitutes that role? What is your day-to-day? What are your requirements? Where can you not fail?
Yeah. So IBM's had a chief privacy officer for almost a quarter of a century. We were the first company in the tech industry to put somebody in a role because we realized that the use of data and the collection of data in e-commerce and the like was going to be a critical point of differentiator. Trust was critically important to our business. We needed to get our arms around that. However, my role is very different than our original chief privacy officer role because I was tasked with building out the AI ethics board at IBM and scaling our program. Now, when you think about it, we've got, I think, 75% of the world has some form of comprehensive data privacy regulation that applies to it. We as a company operate in 170 countries plus around the world. So there are many different laws, rules, and regulations that apply to personal information. Fast forward to laws, rules, and regulations that apply to data more generally when you think of cyber laws and you think of data governance and the like. And now AI, which the fuel for it is data, right? So there's this sort of soup of regulations across many domains that are coming together that businesses need to address, both in order to comply, but also in order to differentiate. In the case of IBM, right? I mean, we've been managing our clients' most valuable data, and they trust us to do that for more than a century. So for us, it's so important that we demonstrate that we've got our arms around this for our clients. And so essentially, my scope involves everything from our privacy program and policies, so very compliance oriented things, to thought leadership around AI ethics and technology ethics, to advocacy. I spend a lot of time as we look at the regulatory environment and the fact that AI is a new area for a lot of governments and policymakers, and what they do and the rules they put in place are going to determine how businesses operate going forward. So we have a very strong point of view on how to regulate AI. And I'm responsible in part for, sharing that message, forming what that point of view is, and then sharing it externally and meeting with policymakers and the like. Clients, I spend a lot of time with our clients who are all trying to figure out how do I adopt AI in a governed and responsible way? How can I use it in my business and yet also trust that it's going to bring value to my business, but also be done in a responsible way? So I spend a lot of time with clients as well. So it's very much a multifaceted role. And that's what makes it so interesting for me.
Do you spend more time making sure IBM stays out of trouble, or do you spend more time making sure or driving responsible practices or best practices across the organization, or is it pretty much a mix of both?
I would say for me, it's probably more time external with clients, with governments, and thinking about that sort of thought leadership, working with our product teams as well in how do we address what our clients' needs are going to be in the space of AI, right? When clients are deploying AI, how are they going to be able to look at it as a positive and a value add for their business and not as a risk? Right? And what solutions do they need to get them there? So I spend more of my time on that, but I have a team, who's well-versed and mature in terms of the core compliance aspects. So when I think of myself as a leader, I don't need to be in the weeds as much on those issues. My team and the company does, but where I'm going to put my personal time is more on the external.
This is going to seem like a weird question. I'm going to say that up front. But you're a lawyer, obviously, and a lawyer is about mitigating risks and ensuring that whoever you're talking to, whether it's a client or whether it's IBM, is staying within the boundaries of, trust. And by the way, if I could pat IBM on the back here, one thing we are known for is trust. I mean, that's one of our brands. And so you've been able to maintain that. Kudos. But do you find yourself, this is where the odd question comes in. I would imagine a lawyer going in front of a client to try to convince them to implement AI would be more about, well, you got to be careful about this. You got to be careful about this. Know this law, do this. I'd walk out of there going, I don't know if I can do it. But I got to believe that's not where you stand, because we want our clients to drive AI. What does that conversation look like?
Yeah. So I should point out my role is essentially a business role. So in my current role, I am not acting as an attorney for the company, right? That sort of frees me up a little bit, right? To be focused more on the benefit side of things. That being the case, our lawyers in the IBM Law Department, we're constantly balancing risks and benefits, right? And that's one of the things you learn as an in-house attorney is you are always making judgment calls. You learn this in law school as well, right? I went into law school thinking law was very black and white and there were clear-cut answers to things. Well, that's simply not the case. So as an attorney, as a business person, whatever it might be, you're always making judgments. You're always either taking risks or making risk assessments and weighing the benefits. So and when I talk to clients, it's very much more about what are the benefits and opportunities, and how do you mitigate the risks while capitalizing on the benefits? That's what AI ethics is as well, right? It's like, how do you maximize the benefits from a technology while mitigating ethical risks? There's never, it's really very much always that balance conversation.
But I got to believe that's super tough. And being a lawyer, you got that background.
Yeah.
You learn the risk and you present the risk. And every time I talk to a lawyer, I usually come out with a little bit more caution than I went in with. I'll give you an example. This isn't a lawyer, by the way, but I went to New York recently for some meetings in last week. And when I was there was a gentleman that has led our security sales team that was sitting across from me. He didn't used to be in security. He was in sustainability, moved to security. Anyway, I'm sitting across from him. I noticed he has two phones. And I was like, why do you have two phones? I mean, I've seen people have two phones. You got a personal phone, obviously, and you probably got a work phone. And he goes, yeah, I absolutely do. And I said, okay, I have one phone. So tell me why you have two phones. And he says, look, I've joined security and I can see all the risks out there. And when I travel worldwide, the only country that I will take my personal phone, which has all my bank accounts and everything else like that on it, is the US. I will not go to any other country with this phone. I leave that behind. I have the work phone. And I'm like, well, you're the security guy. And I am listening. So I'm like, I guess I should pay attention here. He goes, well, I would, but you do whatever you want. I'm not going to get caught. I see what's out there. So I guess what I'm saying, coming back to this situation on the AI ethics piece, you kind of see what's out there. I guess the question I would say is, where should we be very bullish? Like, hey, go all in. This is great. And if you miss this train, you're going to be a laggard with the competition. And which give us like 1, 2, 3 areas of caution that we really got to think about.
Well, one, I would say, the hype over the last year and a half has been around large language models. And when you're adopting something like that in a business, I do think clients need to be cautious. And a lot of the conversations we've had over the last year, internally and externally, have been around, I've had conversations with my peers at other companies, for example, who were considering using those types of large language models and tools. I'm like, look at your agreements very carefully, because you may be contributing your intellectual property to train these models going forward. You may be exposing your intellectual property. They're very large. To think about what problem you're trying to solve with AI technology. And another example is, do you need an LLM of that size and scale within your business to address a particular business problem? Because, they're very compute intensive. They're going to, over time, be very expensive. So I think those are sort of the practical implications associated with, things that lawyers need to consider when they're talking about AI. Lots of conversations around IP have been, very much a new focus of Gen AI. And actually, what we tried to do when LLMs came onto the scene about a year ago, year and a half ago, almost 2 years, right? It was probably the fall of 2023 when ChatGPT was, sort of unleashed into the world and people could see its shortcomings, but also its potential, is really sit down and take like a smart, informed look at what is new about generative AI? What are the new risks and opportunities associated with it? And then how should companies, individuals think about whether they're going to use Gen AI or not use Gen AI? Because there's traditional forms of AI that have been around a long time that are really quite good for a lot of business problems. So I think those kinds of decisions and stepping back and thinking, what are you going to use? Where are you going to use it? And what are the long stream? Because once you build or you invest, for example, in an enterprise with a particular model, you're going to build off of that model, right? So you're making almost a long-term bet, unless you're just experimenting. But once you build it into your workflows, you're placing a long-term bet on this. And I think you need to do it in a smart, informed way.
So I got to drill down on that, large language models, because there's some things about it I do not get. And I think you can help me with this. It's directly in line with everything you said. I get why it's very interesting. I mean, like commercially, you open up ChatGPT, and it's fantastic how it feels like it thinks. It's finishing your sentences. You can ask it any question. You can ask it for a poem. You can also ask it for something else, right? But this is a scrape of the internet's data, a scrape of the data. And I think really there's no caution for copyright material, hate speech, and stuff like that. I mean, I think they're getting better over time. But I find it very unsettling that corporations are making a decision to use these big, large models. And by the way, like Llama, I'll give you an example, just got released, 405 billion parameters. This thing is huge. To be able to put that into production is going to cost you a fortune. So you got to figure out what you're going to do anyway. Most businesses don't care if you can finish a poem. Yep. They're looking for some like financial information. They're looking if you're in insurance or whatever. Anyway, the point is I can't believe how open some of the companies are in using a scrape of the internet. Like, and I may have talked about this on previous podcasts, there's some like data sets out there that other companies are using that got like over 200 million copyright material. And I think there's a sense that, hey, look, we'll deal with that down the line. If we have to pay a fine, we'll pay a fine. But I guess who does that? But I see a lot of companies that are making that decision. Maybe it's uninformed. I don't know. Last thing I'll say, and I'll let you comment, is like the one thing I'm a huge fan of IBM, and I think this is where the industry will go sooner or later. And I think it's happening now because of particularly driven by cost. You got to have a smaller model because of cost, but we're taking the trouble to take out hate speech, copyright material on down the line. So we start with like a model that may be like 28 terabytes and it comes to 7 terabytes. People say, oh, it's a smaller model. Yeah, but it's purpose driven. I can't believe people are just taking a scrape of the internet. I don't know if you have any comments to that. That's probably everything you're talking about, but it's just astounding to me.
Yeah. So I think one misconception, I would say, around how these large language models are trained and IBM's approach is that we're not scraping. We are scraping the internet, right? You can't make a model. You can't make a large language model without crawling the internet. But that being said, there are protocols associated with web crawling that some companies respect and some have been called out for not respecting, right? And there are things like how frequently you're doing it, what sites you're going to, respecting protocols that say, where like robots.txt, which says basically that you can basically say, I don't want my data crawled. By designating that as a protocol on your data when you post it. And respecting that is critically important. And these are sort of behaviors that have been in place for quite a while as accepted practices for web crawling, because web crawling isn't new, right? But it's been kicked up. So the volume and the scope and the scale of it with large language models has increased tremendously. And so I think that's part of like what everybody should understand. And there's websites that are known for having significant amounts of pirated data, for example. And we avoid those in IBM, right? And then there are filters you can put in place to help filter for things like hate and abuse and profanity. And we put those filters in place. So there are protocols and practices that we apply in our training and in our scraping and all of that we think in the end our clients are going to need. They'll help address alignment, they'll help address trust. And this is where, my team is very involved in that process, in that data clearance process and in the vetting very much. And we've built a lot of it in an automated way. We try to make it so that we are improving not only the output, but the speed and scale at which models can be trained through these practices. But that close alignment with the research team and who's building the models and the data clearance function and having as much practices in place that enable you then to be transparent in terms of the policies that you're using, where you're getting your data from, that you are, respecting protocols and disclosing that in our product documentation is a very holistic process that we have in IBM today that I think is leading and actually has been recognized by like Stanford's HIES Transparency Index as the best. I mean, from a data perspective, I think we got the highest scores of any LLM when it comes to things like transparency. So that's I think important for our clients, our clients to know.
I know that we were working with NIST on like an AI regulatory framework, I want to say. We also helped start up the AI Alliance. I don't know if you're involved with those pieces. If you could say a few words on that. And I guess the follow-on question is, what should I be thinking about in terms of that data framework if I'm a client? And when is When is it good enough?
Yeah. So starting with, you asked about NIST. You asked about NIST and what was the other? Sorry,
The
there were
AI
two things.
Alliance we did with Meta.
Right. I'm sorry. Yes.
It's okay.
So NIST risk management framework, that's a way of essentially, they have one for privacy, they have one for cyber. They put a NIST AI risk management framework out a year or two ago. We've been involved in helping NIST with that. Like as a practical user, we've mapped our compliance program against that, provided input all along the way, because it's very important in helping companies think about how they assess the risk of adoption and what practices they need to put in place in their companies. It's a voluntary framework, right? But it helps companies think about AI and AI adoption and AI implementation and deployment. We also, NIST, as part of an executive order from the federal government, stood up an AI Safety Institute, and we are on the consortium for that AI Safety Institute. Arvind Krishna represents us, our CEO, on that consortium, and we've got members of the team in research, in my team, and various others throughout IBM who are contributing actively to work streams, because we think a big part of our point of view is, look, we can't do this alone. And that comes to the AI Alliance as well, right? We're not going to be the lone voice advocating for open source and developing standards and frameworks. And we don't want to. We want to help set the standard that the industry is going to use going forward, right? And when it comes to, so that's the case in the AI Safety Institute and the AI Alliance, early conversations. So it was a little over a year ago that I testified in the first Senate hearing on AI, along with Sam Altman from OpenAI and Gary Marcus. And IBM was asked to be at that table because we are a trusted and longstanding provider in the AI space. We're one of the earliest voices around AI, right? So, but what I heard there frightened me a little bit around calls for licensing of models, very much closed proprietary approaches that in the end would leave essentially a moat around these technologies. But if everyone's going to use AI in the future, and that's very much our vision, it's already pervasive, it's going to be a game changer in terms of innovation and productivity and adoption, and every business is going to adopt it. Do we want that to be the future, to be built on 4 or 5 LLMs that are licensed, locked down, closed? Or do we see a future where everyone is contributing and we open sourced our Granite models, as you know? We're very much proponents. We believe that open is the path to drive innovation. We believe it will be a safer future for AI. We believe many things about open. And so we led, along with Meta, this AI Alliance that now has, I think, 100 members. And it's AI builders, essentially, who are willing to work on standards associated with everything open, from tooling to data sets to compute capacity, et cetera, right? So that the future can be an inclusive one around open and not closed. So that's what the AI Alliance is. Let's break there, because that was a lot of me talking.
Well, that's a terrible host when you ask a 3-part question. That's the first rule, but I break that rule all the time. On the regulation piece, you kind of talked to it a little bit, but what is your suggestion in terms of regulation? How do you balance not getting in the way of innovation with keeping things so they're not completely off the rails? And I worry about this from a competitive standpoint of our country, by example, against other countries that may not have regulation. I mean, if we're being honest, I think some of the countries, I won't mention any, but that have placed regulation, you can see it stifling innovation. So it's a tricky balance. So where do you say, what's your guidance? If you're talking to those lawmakers like you did, what is your suggestion?
Yeah, so we've had a clear point of view on AI regulation that we first articulated in 2020. So long-standing, but Arvind published an updated point of view about a year ago, focusing on essentially what we've called for are 3 things. The first is, like, when you're thinking about regulating AI technology, you have to look at it from the use case. Don't regulate the technology. Don't regulate the algorithm. Where the risk plays out in AI is in the use. It's in the context. So the same model that's used to recommend what restaurant you might like to dine at could also be used to recommend something in a more high-risk space, like who you hire, right? What candidates are the best for your job? And then it could have an effect on, for example, someone's future, as opposed to, okay, I really hated this restaurant. The algorithm was off, right? You would want to recognize those and regulate those very differently and have contextual aspects, like socio-technical aspects to that regulation. You need to understand transportation, for example, to regulate self-driving cars. You just need to have domain expertise. It's very necessary. So regulate risk and use and apply higher risk, higher regulations, more rigid regulations to high risk uses of AI. The second is, if you're deploying, developing AI technology, you should be doing it in a way such that you can be held accountable for what you're putting out into the world. So holding creators and deployers accountable. And then the third is on this open piece. We very much think that we should be recognizing open source, open innovation, and make sure the future is one where we're not locking down and creating a moat around 4 or 5 models. The future is going to be one that invites open innovation and open source. So that's essentially where our latest point of view is.
But this isn't unanimous, right? I mean, there's a lot of competitors out there that we even have that I think it's fair to say that they think, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 models to rule it all is perfectly fine with them. Let me back up. How did that conversation with our lawmakers go? Because I believe you probably had different sides of the equation, and you said something worried you. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, it did. There were definitely different sides to that discussion. And at the time, and this was 2023, there was definitely an appetite for hearing about an Uber regulator for AI and maybe locking down in licensing. That said, that was an exploratory hearing, and none of that has gotten traction in the US. And I think part of the reason it hasn't gotten traction yet, and it's something we're definitely still watching, we're definitely still actively advocating for because we think it's important. But I think, part of the reason is you do, as you mentioned, have to balance in this is a US hearing, and I'm talking about Congress. They are very much have to balance US leadership, with regulation. And what does that mean? And how do you dial that, right? What is the best way to ensure the U.S. remains a leader in AI technology, but also protect against, the risks? And there are very real risks, by the way, associated with deploying AI in high risk spaces. When you think about it in spaces like employment or medical, or critical infrastructure is a huge area, right? Military applications. I mean, there are contexts in which you need to very much consider and put guardrails in place. And so that's why we have been advocating for risk-based regulation for AI for 4.5 years now.
What do you think has been accomplished that you say, yes, this feels good, and what's left to accomplish?
Yeah, they have actually. From a U.S. perspective, well, we still don't have a national privacy law. So we continue to be advocates for privacy legislation, that would focus on what data is collected in the first place and can be used in training from a personal information, perspective. But that being said, a couple things. There's an executive order that the Biden administration launched. I think it's 270 days ago, because they just published an update on that order, and we're supportive of it. It's only focused because this is the purview and the authority that the administration or the White House has is only with respect to government use of AI. But the order was very much telling government agencies, use it, experiment with it, work with AI, right? Figure out how you're using it, report on it, let us know how you're using it, appoint chief AI officers, for example. Focus on the risks, but also the benefits and the opportunities. There are a number of actions and activities, including the AI Safety Institute, that derive from that executive order and that are activating a lot of activity across the US government. In fact, just this morning, a report was released on how to assess the risks of open source. And this is a report from the government. We commented on it. So that was a critical piece of work when you think about what we're advocating for as a company, which is a future that is open, right? So there's lots of work that's been driven there. And then I would say, from a state perspective, states are looking at AI regulation. Colorado just passed a comprehensive AI law, or that will look very similar to what happened in Europe. Europe has the world's first comprehensive AI regulation, and that's the EU AI Act. It actually will go into effect this week.
Are
And
you a fan of that one? I mean, though, would you say, or do you think it stifles innovation? Where does the balance reside on that one, do you think?
we've been supportive of it because it takes a risk-based approach. That being said, it's going to be, we'll see, as they start to roll out the requirements. So the regulation is quite lengthy, but it points to things like data transparency and will create a template, right, for what we mean by data transparency. And I think that's where we'll see it's those types of things that we haven't seen launched yet that we'll need to watch and make sure they're not too prescriptive. They're not prescriptive in a way that's going to hinder innovation. Like, I think the Europe is very aware of the fact that regulation can stifle innovation, and they want to navigate that in a responsible way, right? So we've been supportive of it and the approach that it's taken, and we're helping with products like our WatsonX.governance product is going to help clients to comply with regulations like the EU AI Act. So we're on board. We're engaged with the policymakers and have been for a couple of years now.
You mentioned a lot about data, of course. That's hence the podcast. But any word or anything different we should think about with synthetic data, since there's a lot of synthetic data that's out there today to try to create models?
Yeah, I mean, we and our research team is doing a lot with synthetic data. And I think, some of the shortcomings that we've heard and read about is that it becomes inaccurate over time and becomes sort of useless, right? But it is the future of AI technologies that probably more than half of AI is going to be created by synthetic data. It has a lot of benefits in terms of it will essentially respect creator rights, which have become an issue and the like, right? It will protect personal information because it's not necessarily real. It's synthetic, right? You're making it up. So that being said, we think it's going to bring benefits for sure to AI, and we're exploring ways to create models that are solely built on synthetic data and or to come up with methods like, for example, the InstructLab method that curates synthetic data so that you can trust it more readily and it becomes more accurate and you're getting really good results, because performance is obviously really critical. But I think that synthetic data is going to be, and our research team believes as well, it will be playing a significant role in the future of AI.
And by the way, for you listeners, InstructLab is a method that IBM developed, open source, by the way, that'll allow you to change the base model. Because otherwise, you've got to use fine tuning, which creates multiple models. We've got a way to change that base model with InstructLab, and that's where synthetic data comes in. So, in summary, if you look across this, what do you think is a common misconception, assumption, or something that's wildly incorrect in all your learnings in doing all this?
I don't like to see people get caught up in this debate of AI is going to take over the world, like these existential risk arguments, and that the AI is going to replace every human, right? I think one misconception is humans still play a really significant role in AI development and training, and we certainly play critically important roles in oversight and governance and making decisions as individuals about and as companies, right, about where we're going to use AI technology, what guardrails we're going to put in place around that. It is fully within our control today. And we can't just cede that and there's, again, this existential risk conversation, I think, is one that detracts from us recognizing that humans are in control.
I don't know. I'm working 10, 12-hour days. Nothing has happened as of yet. And to that point, well, we have a client reference called Sevilla FC. There's a football club, Spanish football club. And that's a perfect example of, they came to us around recruiting and they had like 200,000 game player reports they have to go through. Mm-hmm. And it takes them 400 hours to do this. by using our solution, AI, they get it done in minutes, and they're able to put their model, their scoring, just the same their mental model would be if or went through every one of these. So they're able to add even more consistency. They're able to narrow it down. It's not like they got rid of anybody, but what they did is then they take those people and they put them more in one-on-one to talk to the players. So they got more time to interview the players, to interface with them, to make sure they're right by the team. So still the same number of people, just more efficient. It's a perfect example of efficiency. So with that, this is me asking Christina, what worries you in all this?
What worries me is they aren't thoughtful about the conversations that we have to have now. And data has been used, for example, to train AI for many years now. But what we're seeing happening, we've got a number of really big companies that can pay for data, that are buying more of it. Media and the like are putting it behind paywalls. It's becoming more inaccessible. And I don't want to see us have a future where data, where models, where all that AI development and training is only accessible to a small subset of companies, of individuals, and the like. So I think we have a chance right now to establish the future for what AI development, deployment, and use is going to look like. And we can't cede that to the headlines that we see every day about those who are talking about AI replacing all humans, taking over the world, buying up data, locking down LLMs, and the like. We need to have the important conversations about that future now.
You've been fantastic to talk to. How do you get into AI as much as you've gotten into AI, right? You're like an AI expert. And how technical do you think you are now? I mean, you sound extremely technical. You're like an AI, and I was looking at your history, and you've been in AI for quite a while now. This is like a theme and is it a passion for you? I mean, tell me more about it.
So I was asked to take this job 5 years. I've been in this particular role almost exactly 5 years. And I knew nothing, basically I was asked, well, you need to set up an AI ethics board for IBM. And I literally asked, like, what is AI ethics? But the way I've approached every new job, every role, every change in technology, is to learn, right? So you sit and you take in information, you learn every day. And this is a space where there literally are developments every single day. I think it's hugely important for anybody who's working in the space of technology or even business to continually be learning and be passionate about learning. So I got into this space sort of because I was asked to. That being said, it has become a real passion. And part of the reason it's become a real passion is because it's pervasive in terms of our lives. It's evolving every day, and I can learn something new every single day that I show up.
You talked to continue learning, by the way, going back to where we started. Like I told my daughter, I said, you're going to pass this test and there's going to be many other tests. I know it's not going to be the bar, but you got to keep learning. It's going to keep changing. You got to learn new law. I mean, this is just the beginning. So get used to it. You're being trained to train. All right. Last question. What is your recommendation for an aspiring lawyer that just passed the bar?
My recommendation. Law is a very broad profession with lots of different domains and areas for involving. Do something that interests you. Pick a subject that interests you, that inspires you every day. Go into that field, whatever it might be, and always learn. Law is a learned profession, which essentially means, you're responsible and you should be learning something new all the time. It's not static. So I think that's one of the best parts about it. And the way you can flex and go into different industries and areas, I think just provides an opportunity for continual learning.
Awesome. I think that's a good point to end on. Christina, you've been fabulous. I greatly appreciate it. Learned a lot today. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And listeners, you know how I'm going to end it. Please hit us on almartintalksdata@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We put the people on that you want to hear about. And until next time, we will see you on the podcast. Later, guys. Bye-bye.